The smoke rose black against the desert sky, twisting like a dying snake in the afternoon heat. Clara Mitchell pressed her face against the wooden floor of her family's general store, splinters digging into her cheek as another volley of gunfire shattered the windows above. Glass rained down like hail, mixing with the acrid smell of gunpowder and burning timber. "Stay down, Clara." Her father's voice cut through the chaos, but when she turned her head, she saw him slumped against the counter, his white shirt blooming red across the chest. His Winchester lay useless beside him, one hand still reaching for it. Outside, Apache war cries pierced the air, sharp, haunting sounds that made her blood run cold. She'd heard stories at the trading post, whispered tales of raids and massacres, but nothing had prepared her for this. The thundering hooves circled the small settlement of Bitter Creek like vultures. Through a gap in the floorboards, she saw her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, run for the church. An arrow struck her between the shoulders, and she crumpled in the dust. Her bonnet rolled away in the wind, blonde hair spilling across the dirt like sunlight fading. Clara's hands trembled as she crawled toward her father. "Papa," she whispered. His eyes stared past her at something she couldn't see. She pressed her palm against the wound, but the blood seeped through her fingers, hot and slick. The front door exploded inward. 3 Apache warriors burst through, their faces painted in stark lines of black and red. The leader, tall and lean with scars crisscrossing his bare chest, swept the room with eyes dark and sharp as obsidian. He barked something in his language, and the others began ransacking the store, scattering flour and beans across the floor. Clara scrambled backward until her spine hit the wall. The scarred warrior approached slowly, moccasins silent on the wood. Up close, she could see the notches on his rifle stock, each one a life taken. "Please," she managed, her throat dry as sand. "I have nothing." He reached down, grabbing her wrist and yanking her to her feet with effortless strength. His grip was iron, his calloused fingers biting into her skin. She tried to pull away, but he dragged her toward the door, past her father's body, past the overturned barrels and shattered glass. Outside, Bitter Creek burned. The church steeple collapsed in a shower of sparks, taking with it the bell that had called them to Sunday service just 3 days ago. Bodies littered the street, friends, neighbors, people she'd known all her life, now motionless shapes in the dirt. She was shoved toward a paint pony, its sides slick with sweat. The scarred warrior mounted behind her, one arm clamping around her waist like a vice. She could smell him, smoke, leather, and something raw and wild, like sage and earth. As they wheeled away from the burning settlement, she caught one last glimpse of her home, just another pillar of smoke rising into the endless Arizona sky. They rode hard through the afternoon and into the night, a war party of 20 braves and their captives. Clara wasn't alone. She recognized the baker's daughter, Sarah, slung across another horse, and young Tommy Morrison, no more than 12, his face streaked with tears and dirt. But as the hours dragged on, Clara focused only on staying conscious, on not falling from the horse, though her body screamed in protest. The land changed from scrub brush to rocky canyons, from flat plains to rising mesas. They followed invisible trails through the darkness, guided by ancient knowledge of the land. When they finally stopped at a hidden spring, Clara's legs gave out the moment her feet touched the ground. She crawled to the water on hands and knees, drinking greedily until the warrior pulled her back by the hair. He said something sharp in Apache, and the others laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. One of them, younger and freshly painted, approached with a strip of rawhide. Clara's wrists were bound tight, the leather cutting into her skin. They gave her a handful of dried meat and a sip of water. Nothing more. By dawn, they climbed higher into Apache territory. The air turned thin and cold. Clara's Sunday dress hung in tatters, torn by thorns and stained with dust and fear. Her feet bled through her worn boots, each step agony on the rocky trail. The other captives fared no better. Sarah hadn't spoken since Bitter Creek, her eyes vacant as a doll's. Tommy whimpered now and then, but he'd learned. Crying brought only sharp words and harder writing. Clara wanted to comfort them, but she had nothing left to give. No strength. No words that wouldn't sound hollow against the weight of what they'd lost. By the second night, they reached the war camp, a cluster of wickiups nestled in a valley between towering cliffs. Smoke drifted upward from cook fires, and Clara saw women and children moving among the dome-shaped dwellings. Dogs barked at their approach, and faces appeared in doorways, curious, hostile, watchful. The scarred warrior dismounted and hauled Clara down after him. Her legs buckled and she nearly fell, but he dragged her through the camp as warriors called out greetings, some with respect, others with laughter. Clara lifted her chin, trying to keep what little dignity she had left. The Apache women watched her pass. Some spat in the dirt. Others just stared, taking in her pale skin, her tangled auburn hair, the torn dress of a white woman who didn't belong. They stopped before a larger wickiup set apart from the others. The scarred warrior called out, and an elderly woman stepped out, her face lined and unreadable. She examined Clara like inspecting livestock, running gnarled fingers through her hair, checking her arms and teeth. Finally, she nodded and gestured toward a smaller shelter nearby. Clara was shoved inside, where Sarah and two other women huddled in the dim light. The space smelled of smoke and hide, barely large enough for them all. Guards stood outside, rifles gleaming in the firelight. "What will they do with us?" Sarah whispered, voice small and cracked. Clara pulled her close, feeling the girl tremble. Outside, drums began to beat, a steady, rising rhythm that seemed to echo Clara's pounding heart. She didn't answer because she couldn't. She already knew that death might not be the worst fate awaiting them here in this valley of stone and shadow. As the night deepened, she lay awake staring through the smoke hole, watching the stars wheel cold and distant above. She thought of her father's last breath, of the home that no longer stood, of everything gone in a single day. Tomorrow would bring new horrors. She was certain of that. But beneath her fear, a single ember of will refused to die. Whatever these Apache had planned for her, she would face it. She would not break. She would not die easy. The morning sun struck the canyon walls like hammered copper, and Clara woke to the sound of women's voices and clattering pottery. Through the small opening of the wickiup, she saw life stirring in the Apache camp. Children chased dogs between the dwellings, and women tended fires, grinding corn or carrying water in clay pots. It looked almost peaceful, if not for the guards with rifles and the memory of Bitter Creek still burning in her mind. An Apache woman ducked into the shelter, middle-aged, with streaks of gray in her dark hair, and eyes as hard as river stones. She gestured sharply, and Clara understood they were to follow. Sarah clung to her arm as they stepped into the sunlight, blinking against the brightness. The other captives, Martha and Ellen, moved close behind. They were herded toward the center of the camp, where a group of elders sat in a semicircle. Their faces were carved with age, their eyes sharp and measuring. At the center sat a man whose presence quieted everyone around him. His hair was silver, his posture straight, despite the years. He spoke first in Apache, his tone calm but powerful. The scarred warrior, the one who had taken Clara, stood to the side, arms crossed, watching her closely. When the elder finished, the warrior stepped forward and pointed at each captive, speaking quickly in his language. Clara caught one word repeated several times, Taza. The elders murmured among themselves until the silver-haired leader raised his hand. Silence fell. Then, to Clara's shock, he addressed her in slow, accented English. "You are strong," he said. "Not break like others. That is why you chosen." "Chosen for what?" Clara's voice trembled, but she stood straight. The elder's expression did not change. "Our greatest warrior lies dying. No Apache woman may see his weakness. It is forbidden. But you," his eyes traveled over her, cold and dismissive, "you are nothing. You can tend him without breaking sacred law." "I'm no healer," Clara said quickly. "I don't know how." You learn or you die, the elder replied simply. This is kindness. Others, he gestured toward Sarah and the remaining captives. They become slaves, maybe wives, if lucky. You have different purpose. Before Clara could speak again, the scarred warrior grabbed her arm and pulled her away. Sarah cried out her name, but the sound was swallowed by the noise of the camp. They walked through narrow paths between wickiups until they stopped at one larger than the rest, marked with strange symbols painted in red and black. Spirals, lightning bolts, and animal figures that seemed to shift in the flickering light. The entrance was covered with a heavy buffalo hide. The warrior called something out, and a deep voice answered from inside, low, rough, and filled with pain. The warrior lifted the hide and shoved Clara through. The smell hit her first, herbs, smoke, and something darker, the sour scent of infection. In the dim light, she saw him lying on a bed of furs. He was massive, his body scarred and powerful even in sickness. Every inch of him spoke of violence and survival. Knife scars, bullet holes, the marks of 100 battles. His skin gleamed with sweat, and his chest rose unevenly. But when his eyes opened, dark and sharp, they locked on her with startling clarity. So, he said in perfect English, his voice low and steady, they send me a white woman to watch me die. The scarred warrior spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Clara. The man on the furs, this must be Taza, listened without taking his gaze off her. When the warrior finished, Taza laughed, a sound like distant thunder that ended in a cough speckled with blood. Leave us, he said in Apache. The warrior hesitated but finally bowed and left. Clara stood frozen near the entrance. The space seemed smaller now, filled by his presence. She could see the wound clearly, a deep, angry gash along his ribs, streaked with red and black where infection had set in. Come closer, little rabbit, Taza said softly. I won't bite, not much strength for it anyway. I told them I'm no healer, Clara said, not moving. No, he agreed, but you have hands, and you can follow orders. Unless you'd rather join your friends, I hear Standing Bear has his eye on the young one. Her heart clenched. She stepped forward, jaw tight. What do you want me to do? There's water in that gourd, he said, motioning weakly. Cloths in the basket. Clean the wound. Change the herbs. Try not to faint at the sight of a little blood. Clara knelt beside him, her hands shaking only slightly. The wound was worse than she'd thought. Whoever had tended it last had used dried herbs that were now useless. She soaked a cloth and began cleaning around the edges, careful but firm, each time the wet fabric touched the wound. Taza's muscles tensed beneath her hands, but he made no sound. You're different from the others, he murmured after a moment. How would you know? She asked without looking up. Because you're angry, not afraid, he said. Fear is useless. Anger can be shaped into strength. She worked silently, refusing to rise to his bait. The infection ran deep, and she doubted even a doctor could save him. As she wiped the blood away, she saw how many scars marked his body. Thin lines across his chest, burns on his arms, a jagged one along his jaw. Without meaning to, her fingers brushed one. In an instant, his hand shot up and gripped her wrist. His eyes snapped open, dark and unreadable. Curiosity killed the white woman, he said softly. You're burning with fever, Clara replied, her voice steady. This wound is killing you. Everything dies, he said, releasing her wrist. Some just take longer. Quote, she finished cleaning the wound and mixed new herbs into a paste. He watched her with unnerving stillness. When she finally tied the bandage in place, he spoke again. What's your name? Clara Mitchell. Clara, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the sound. It means bright, yes? Are you bright, Clara Mitchell? Bright enough to know this wound needs more than herbs and prayers, she said, trying to keep her tone firm. He gave a quiet laugh that turned into another cough. You speak your mind. That will save you, or get you killed. An elderly woman entered the wickiup then, bent but fierce-eyed. She scolded in Apache, glaring at Clara as if she'd done something shameful. Taza replied in their tongue, his voice firm. The woman muttered, but set down a pot of steaming broth. She turned to Clara and said in broken English, "Twice a day. Clean. Feed. No, talk to others. You see his weakness. You die. Understand?" Clara nodded. "That's Grey Dove," Taza said after the woman left. "She thinks I should have died in battle, not in bed." Quote, "She's not wrong," Clara muttered before she could stop herself. Taza's lips curved in faint amusement. "Maybe not." Clara ladled broth into a bowl and handed it to him. When she moved to help him sit up, he waved her off and struggled upright on his own. Pride, she realized. Even dying, he refused help. As he ate, she glanced around. Weapons hung from the poles, rifle, bow, lance, scalps she didn't want to look at. This was the dwelling of a legend, a man raised to conquer or die. "You're thinking you've been caged with a monster," he said, setting aside the bowl. "Haven't I?" "Perhaps," he said, "but monsters are made, not born. Sometimes they're the only ones left to protect their people." Clara rose, gathering her things. At the entrance she paused. "Why do you speak English so well?" "Know your enemy," he said without opening his eyes. "I spent 2 years at the white man's school in Carlisle. They tried to kill the Apache in me." He smiled faintly. "They failed." When Clara stepped outside, blinking in the harsh light, she felt the full weight of her task. She was to tend a dying legend, her enemy, a man who'd likely killed her people. Yet as she walked back through the camp, she couldn't shake the image of those fever-bright eyes and the strange calm in his voice. Maybe monsters weren't born, after all. Maybe they were made. By war, by pain, by loss. And maybe she was becoming one too. The flickering firelight painted restless shadows across the wickiup walls as Clara entered for the evening tending. 3 days had passed since her first encounter with Taza, and each visit felt like walking into the den of a wounded animal, dangerous, magnetic, unpredictable. Tonight the fever had worsened. His breathing was shallow, his skin slick with sweat. He lay motionless, except for the rise and fall of his chest. The smell of sickness and herbs filled the small space, heavy and suffocating. Clara set down her supplies, fresh water, strips of clean cloth torn from her petticoat, and a new poultice Grey Dove had grudgingly shown her how to make. "You're late," Taza rasped without opening his eyes. Clara jumped. "The women kept me working," she said quietly, dipping a cloth into the warm water, "grinding corn until my hands bled." "Good," he muttered. "Soft hands are useless here." She peeled away the old bandage and bit her lip. The wound looked worse, angry and red, the infection spreading. She pressed the damp cloth gently to the inflamed skin, cleaning it as best she could. "This is getting worse," she said under her breath. "Observant little rabbit," Taza murmured. "Perhaps you should be a medicine woman." Clara pressed the cloth a little harder. He tensed but made no sound. "A white medicine woman among the Apache? How long would I last?" "Longer than you think," he said, his eyes half open now, watching her. "We respect those who heal." She ignored the strange flutter in her chest and focused on the wound. The infection was deep, but beneath the fever she sensed something else in him, a will that refused to surrender. "You're afraid of me," he said suddenly. Clara froze, her hand still on his side. "Shouldn't I be?" "Yes," he said softly, "but not for the reasons you think." Quote. She looked up. "What reasons then?" A slow, knowing smile crossed his lips. "Because I see you, Clara Mitchell. The fire under that polite white woman mask. The part of you that didn't die when your town burned." His words unsettled her. "You don't know anything about me." "No?" he asked. "Then why do your hands grow gentle when you think I'm asleep? Why do you bring extra water when you know the fever burns worst at night? Why do you look at my scars like they're a map you're trying to read?" Clara's face flushed. "I'm doing what I must to survive." "Lie if it helps," he said, voice low and calm, "but we both know there's more." He moved suddenly, catching her wrist. His grip was strong, despite the fever, his skin hot against hers. The contact sent a jolt through her she couldn't explain. "Let go," she whispered. "Make me," he said. For a moment, neither moved. The fire crackled softly between them, the air charged with something dangerous. She could feel his pulse against her skin, fast and irregular. His eyes were molten, unreadable. "You're burning up," she said finally. "Save your strength for fighting death, not me." Something in his gaze softened. He released her slowly, his fingers brushing her skin on the way down. "You have spine," he said. "That will keep you alive." "Maybe I'm just too tired to be afraid anymore," she said, wiping her palms on her skirt. "No," he said. "You're changing. You just haven't noticed yet." She didn't answer. She finished cleaning and rewrapping the wound, then helped him sit up to drink. When their arms touched, the brief contact sent another spark through her, one she tried to ignore. As he drank, she studied his face. Even sick and scarred, there was something commanding about him, something that pulled at her despite every reason to hate him. "You should rest," she said. He smiled faintly. "You'll miss me when I'm gone." "Don't flatter yourself," she said, but her voice trembled. He leaned back, eyes closing. "Maybe I'm not flattering myself, little rabbit. Maybe I'm warning you." Clara gathered her things and turned to leave. "Good night, Taza." Quote, "Good night, Clara Mitchell," he murmured. "Dream of something other than fire." Outside, the air was cool and clear. She stood for a moment, breathing it in, trying to calm the wild beat of her heart. The stars stretched endless above, cold and bright over the desert. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, and Clara felt the sound deep in her bones. Days passed. The fever broke. Slowly, Taza regained his strength. He began sitting upright, talking more. Sometimes he laughed, a rough sound, rusty from disuse. And somehow, against every warning, Clara began to laugh too. One morning he caught her humming as she cleaned the wound, and asked, "What is that?" "A song my mother used to sing," she said, startled. "What does it mean?" "It means you'll be all right." He smiled, eyes glinting. "Then sing it again." She did, her voice trembling but clear. And in that moment, for the first time since Bitter Creek burned, Clara Mitchell didn't feel like a captive. When she left his tent that evening, she found the sky streaked in crimson. Gray Dove watched her pass, muttering something in Apache. The stares of the women followed her, some curious, some cold. As she knelt by the fire to wash her hands, Sarah's quiet voice came from the shadows. "They say he's claiming you." Clara's hands stilled in the water. "What?" "They say Taza's mark is on you now, that you belong to him." Clara stared into the rippling water. "No one owns me." Sarah gave a small, sad smile. "Try telling him that." That night, Clara lay awake, staring through the smoke hole again. The stars above seemed closer now, brighter somehow. She thought of Taza's voice, rough and deep, the warmth of his hand, the strange peace she felt in his presence. He was her enemy. He was supposed to be everything she hated. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw his face instead of the flames that had destroyed her life. She turned on her side, pressing a hand against her chest where her heart thudded hard and uncertain. Somewhere between fear and survival, something else had taken root, something wild, something that frightened her more than any Apache ever could. And though she didn't yet know it, that feeling, the one she refused to name, would soon cost her everything.